Hey, we're going to do a little video right now about Dendrobium. It's a really amazing family of orchids, and there's a lot to know about it. We're going to go over some basics, and maybe if you guys got any questions, send us a message. Dendrobium is a large genus of orchids. It's one of the largest. They exist from Australia area all the way up into Asia and covering a lot of East Asia. There are some 1,600 species, if I'm not mistaken, and they range from these tiny, tiny little bitty ones to some things that can get really, really large. Some of the different types of Dendrobiums can be broken up into different families. We have ones like Cuthbertsonii, and these things tend to come from areas like Papua New Guinea. They like it cool. They like it fairly wet. They don't like a lot of salts. So if you do fertilize this thing, flush it with clean water afterwards to get the salts out. This is the Dendrobium Cuthbertsonii, and if you look closely, the flower is larger than the plant that it's blooming off of. The section of plant where it's blooming is actually smaller than the flower itself. This flower will last 4 to 6 months if you keep it cool, shady, and wet. It's a really good one for terrariums. If you're a terrarium grower and you can get the conditions for this right, it's a lovely flower. Cuthbertsonii also has a peculiar attribute where you'll see in nature multiple flower forms in the same sites, which is kind of an odd thing. But it's a beautiful flower, and there's a lot of really nice colors to choose from with this. A lot of Dendrobiums will make a long cane and then lose the leaves. And at first, when people start growing these, they get very concerned. But if you look closely, very closely, the parts that have the leaves completely fallen off is actually where the flower is. See the buds starting to form on this? There have been veteran growers that come to this nursery and they say, I'm doing everything right. I grow the plant, and when the leaves fall off, I trim off the dead parts, but on a lot of Dendrobiums, the dead part is where they flower. Look at this thing. The dead part is where the bloom is. No leaves on it at all. Now, one thing that's peculiar to some types of Dendrobium, especially Latouria Dendrobiums, is not only will they flower from the part where there's no leaves, but they'll flower from old growth again and again. This type of Dendrobium is a Latouria Dendrobium. If you look at the old growth down here, this is the old part where the flower and the plant was first getting started. And look, it's making flowers again. And the parts in between are all making flowers again. Many orchids will flower from their new growth and only from their new growth. But these Latouria Dendrobium will flower again and again from their old growth. The bigger this plant gets, the more flowers it's going to make every year. So a really wonderful thing about this type of Dendrobium. This type of Dendrobium, and a lot of the Dendrobiums that lose their leaves, like Nobili or Lodogesii, they'll have a fragrant flower on them. This one smells like orange peels when it blooms. And when the leaves fall off, that's the part that's going to bloom next. And with this type, when you get to the point where the leaves are falling off, they like to be cooler and drier. There's a lot of plants in the world, a lot of orchids in the world that come from climates where they get cool and dry in winter. They still like quite a bit of light. So let them get cool and dry with a lot of light in winter. The colder you let them get, the drier they should be. Right now, this wall goes down to about 50, and we're watering maybe twice a week. Dendrobiums can be very fun plants, and it's a really fun one to divide, and you can sometimes share with your friends. This one is a Nobili hybrid. It's got a fragrant flower. It smells almost like honey mustard. It's sweet and spicy. And you can see it's getting ready to bloom here, and it's getting ready to bloom over here. A lot of this plant is getting ready to bloom. But what we're going to do is divide this plant and share it with some friends of ours. When we divide this plant, this type of Dendrobium actually has a lot of options. It's planted in moss right now, and it's just fine. You can leave it in moss, plant it in moss again if moss is your preferred medium. If it's in moss, the moss retains water longer. So if you're the type of person that forgets to water and you water less often, you can pot it in moss. If you're watering it more, sometimes it's better to pot it in bark. Today we're going to pot it in a pot in bark, so that this one, when the winter time comes, we can let it dry out a little easier. I'm not going to take this plant out of the pot. I'm really just going to take this keiki off. When you have an orchid and it produces roots somewhere up on the plant, we call it a keiki. It's a Hawaiian word that means baby. To take it off, you need to use a firm grip with a gentle touch. I like to say a lot of times when handling your orchid, use a firm grip and a gentle touch. Hold it firmly and just twist it slightly and it'll pop right off. Some of these roots are still stuck in the old pot, so I'm going to pull them gently to get them out. And we have a beautiful, lovely new plant. We're going to pot this up, and it has flower buds coming on this. And later today, we're going to visit a friend and give it to them. First, put a little of your potting medium inside the pot to get some room for the roots to grow into. And then with this one, I kind of like to swirl it, almost like spaghetti. You can swirl the noodles just a little bit. These roots really want to come out, but you want to keep them in there. Throw a little just to keep them down. And then your new growth, I like to always try as much as possible to have my new growth in the middle, so that when the plant starts to grow out and make other new growth, it's filling in the pot and it's keeping it kind of even. With most of your orchids, when it's time to repot it, you have to really crunch it down. This is where everybody has problems. Use your thumb and the weight of your body to crunch it down. Is it in there tight enough? Here's how we'll know. Can you pick the plant up and shake it? If you can pick the plant up and shake it, and it doesn't fall out, that's pretty good. Then I like to put a nice little loose layer on top. And you're done. With this type of dendrobium, sometimes the plant starts to get heavy as it grows larger, and you might need to support it. So just put a stake in, and get a large clip, plant clip, or a hair clip, and you're ready to go. The taller and longer it gets, the more you have room to support it. This is another famous dendrobium. In Hawaii, they call this one the hono. It's a Dendrobium anosmum, the Latin name for it. And the name means doesn't smell, but the joke's on us because it actually smells really, really nice. Dendrobiums have so many unique individuals in their family. This one is really famous for being close to a true blue. Parts of the flower get very, very blue when reflecting the light correctly. A lot of orchids get close to blue, but they're really just purple, and blue is a hard pigment for orchids to make on its own. That's why we like Victoria Regina. It's one of the bluest orchids. Dendrobiums can be very rewarding even in a small size. There are a lot of miniature varieties that are excellent for terrariums. With a lot of these dendrobiums, they do want a bright light, and in the Pacific Northwest where we are, we tend to water them very, very well in summer. We water them very, very well in summer. We give them lots of water, and if it's a bright day, a series of bright days in a row, we might water them every day. This is also when we tend to fertilize them a little heavier. And in winter, as it gets cold, we water them less and let them dry out a bit more. Dendrobiums are also notorious pouts. They will sometimes drop their leaves on the areas where they're not happy. It can be bad on some of them, but they will grow new leaves again. And on others, it's just part of their natural cycle. But dendrobiums are notorious for dropping leaves. So if your dendrobium drops leaves, don't panic. It's just what they do. With dendrobiums being such a large family, they're not all equal. And you really need to look at which type of dendrobium you're dealing with. If you don't know, and it's a little bitty thing like this, it's probably going to be wetter, cooler, and shadier. And if it's something that gets bigger like this, make the light brighter and the temperature warmer and water it more often. One of the best things you can do is ask the people in your area. Find your local orchid society and see how they're growing dendrobium. You grow dendrobium much different in Florida than you do in Seattle.